This game was given to me for free by Nintendo, and by no means will that affect my review of Fire Emblem Fates. So when I say I'm reviewing Fire Emblem Fates, that means I'm reviewing all three Fates games in one video, being Birthright, Conquest, and Revelations. Now, there's not a better time to announce this than here, but I'm planning a Fire Emblem Retrospective sometime this fall, where I'm going through every single Fire Emblem ever made so far. What that means for you today is that I'm not going to evaluate every individual Fates games like I would there. This review is going to be about all three games as one package, and whether or not you should invest your time and money into them. So, should you? First things first, let's discuss the story. In the beginning, you take control of your own customizable avatar that I'll be calling Corrin throughout the rest of the video. As Corrin, you're introduced to two rival kingdoms, the Nor and the Hoshido, that are perpetually in a state of war. Not to spoil the plot, but both of the kingdoms worship different dragon entities, so they battle each other because of it and for power. So, Corrin wakes up in the Nor Kingdom, where the player learns the basics of Fire Emblem combat, and also learns about how the Nor King Garen runs his kingdom. You can tell he's lusting for power and will do almost anything for it, even forcing you to murder innocent Hoshido soldiers. After a skirmish with the Hoshido, being dropped off a bridge by a rogue mercenary, and being rescued by Lilith the Astral Dragon, you're captured by the Hoshido, who recognize you as a sibling that was lost and captured by the Nor. When you go back to the capital city, you meet your own mother, who is promptly murdered by a sword King Garen gave you. This causes you to go Super Saiyan and turn into a dragon, allowing you to then mow down the Nor projections that suddenly appeared alongside the Hoshido. Then, you and the other Hoshido, including their leader named Ryoma, venture to the battlefield where they encounter the Nor. And this is the point where you're given the choice between joining the Nor for conquest, or joining the Hoshido for your family ties. Funnily enough, this is the same point where one of the biggest issues I have with Fates appears: the illusion of choice. There is no choice here when you're playing Fates. Your choice comes before when you purchase either Conquest, Birthright, or Revelations for $40, $40, or $20 respectively. So if you want to experience the entirety of Fire Emblem Fates, you need to dish out a whopping $100 to Nintendo, or $80 if you're lucky enough to find the special edition. The fact that Fates is divided, kind of like the Three Kingdoms in it, into three games is a problem, because say if you bought Conquest or played Conquest first, didn't know anything about the fact that your big choice is what game you decide to purchase, saw all the evil King Garen does and wanted to join the Hoshido, you couldn't. Same deal in some regards with Birthright or Revelations. I don't like that my choice is already decided for me before I even play the game. I'm sure some people might counter this and say, well, you should research first to see what game you should play then, but why? Why do I need to do that when Nintendo is completely capable of putting all three choices in one copy? I would be completely fine buying Fates as a package of three choices even if the cost was higher, because I really love Fates. And before you say it, no, this is not like the two Pokemon version choices. In Pokemon, the story, level design, and everything in between is not really different in either version. Despite all this flack I'm giving the choice, I absolutely love all three stories in Fates. Whether you become a Hoshido, a Nor, or denounce them both and become a traitor, the plot is just as interesting. Characters have actual character development and feel like actual human beings with different motives and personalities. For instance, you have someone like Camilla who is over-sexualized for the sake of being over-sexualized because that's how her character is. Even though she may be the reason for many people choosing Conquest over Birthright, she isn't just a one-dimensional piece of cardboard. Then you have a mysterious character like Azura, who is kind of a damsel in distress, but has more importance than that. She has a hidden past, and her role in the story makes you care a lot about her. It's weird, no matter what side you're on, you really do care about all the characters. During Chapter 6, where you essentially have to slaughter your friends on either side, you feel kind of bad for battling your ex-friends. A big reason why I think you're led to care about almost every character in the story is the fantastic writing and flow. No element feels too contrived or rushed, so the story has a nice rhythm to it. And the conflicts you do have to solve aren't just written in as arbitrary random missions as they were in Awakening. Most of the battles matter and are fought with a purpose. So let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. The comparison to Awakening. For what it's worth, overall Awakening is a good game, but not necessarily a good Fire Emblem game in the eyes of many people, including myself. I found the story of Awakening to be generic and uninteresting, and most of the characters are one-dimensional stereotypes that I couldn't care less about. Plus, the writing is very cheesy and rarely interesting. On my first playthrough, I just skipped over it. But this is not the case with Fates. I didn't ever skip a cutscene, character interaction, or story element in Fates, except when I had to restart some missions after losing a unit. In comparison to Awakening's story and gameplay, which we'll get to in a bit, Fates is far superior, and no, you don't have to play Awakening to grasp Fates' story or how the mechanics work. As for the presentation, it's also a huge step up from Awakening's, both in its sound and visual departments. Fates uses the same engine as Awakening, but improves on several aspects of it. For one thing, the UI is now a lot clearer and more concise, with simplified character stats and a well-detailed map. You can also seamlessly zoom in and out of the map with L and R to see where every enemy is and how they might move to attack you. Not to mention, when you encounter an enemy and engage them in battle, or vice versa, this cool animation plays where the camera zooms in on you with motion blur, displaying the actual battle taking place. It's a nice little feature that makes the gameplay feel a bit more fluid than it would otherwise. Speaking of the animations, the combat animations are a joy to watch for the most part, especially with other support characters involved. Seeing other characters protect the main fighting character in some unique way is pretty neat. Also, the character models themselves look clean and great. Sure, you could argue they look too under-detailed, but you have to understand, for being on a 3DS which isn't capable of 1080p, I think they're great. The illustrations that pop up during character interactions with different expressions are also a nice touch. Oh, and the levels you venture to and fight others in are all varied and distinctly designed, which prevents any stage from becoming too dull. I don't think there's any part of Fate's visual presentation I dislike, honestly. All in all, the graphical presentation is stellar and the game itself is technically solid. Never did I once receive a frame rate drop that I could recall. And oh geez, that soundtrack is amazing. I love the music in Fire Emblem Fates. In some songs, there are callbacks to other Fire Emblem songs, but they never feel too forced or overdone. In the track Record, they remixed the original Fire Emblem main theme with chimes and string instruments. When I first heard it, I instantly fell in love. This track is a musical masterpiece, and all the different movements in the piece, from the transition to the old Fire Emblem theme to the sort of march, flow together so well. It's about 6 minutes of pure heaven, and that's just one of the many songs in Fates that I can't stop listening to. See, that's just a theme that plays during downtime, but with the battle themes, they're a lot more unique. Every battle theme has two parts, a sort of calm interlude of strings and light percussion that plays in the overworld, and a more rigorous, fast-paced part when you engage an enemy. For example, there's a track called Skirmish that has both a calm and a blaze version of it for those two different settings. Both pieces are phenomenal, and easily my favorite tracks in the game. Even Azura's vocal track isn't cringeworthy and has a nice catchy melody. Whenever she started singing, I couldn't help but hum along too. Point is, almost every track in Fates is memorable and interesting. The one song I couldn't care less about is the spa track because of the water droplet sound effects in the background. But in-game, it's perfectly fine. Now that all of that is out of the way, let's move on to arguably the most enjoyable aspect of Fire Emblem, the gameplay. For the uninitiated, Fire Emblem is a turn-based tactical strategy game. It involves the player being given an objective and organizing their units to try to fight their way through said objective. You take control of all of your units as you must strategically plan out their routes to stay safe and kill as many enemies as possible. What makes this more compelling is that every unit has their own stats and weapon class, so you really have to think about what unit should attack what enemy and where they should go so they don't get flanked after that move. Fire Emblem in general really makes you think about every move you make, as it can be really punishing at times. Enemy AI is fierce and usually tries to weed out your weaker units first, so you have to make sure not to leave them vulnerable at all. Because if a unit dies, they die for good. And if your dedicated healer dies on a very difficult mission, it may just be game over for you in a couple turns. That is, if you're playing on classic difficulty. To make the game more accessible to the younger demographic, I suppose, Nintendo elected to include 2 other difficulties where you don't lose your units for good, and another one where your units eventually come back to the battlefield. Why Nintendo decided to include the latter, I will never understand. The game is rated T, so why would people not want any challenge? See, with classic difficulty, this makes the game a lot tougher because if you're like me and care about every character and how they relate to others, you try to keep them all alive. So if one unit dies, I always reset, and for some of the later, harder chapters, I found myself resetting quite a bit. Although I got extremely frustrated and actually had to take a break at one point, I was still having fun. When you begin to care about the outcome of every move, the gameplay also becomes more engaging. Not only that, but the level design is so brilliant in Fates as opposed to Awakenings, which to me felt a little drab. Let's take the first mission for example. This is the first level in which the game takes off your leash and lets you dive into the world of the punishing Fire Emblem gameplay. The level is designed in a way to coax you towards moving to the castle near the end of the 2 drawbridges initially, but if you go that way, your units are sure to be destroyed by the enemies there. Naturally, the only other option is to go down and use your Dragon's Vein to create another path and flank those enemies from behind if you want. Or, if you're feeling lucky, you can bypass that group of soldiers and go straight to the castle you're intended to capture and end the fight there. See, there are a lot of options for almost every level in Fates, so you can devise your own tactics to be the most beneficial for your playstyle. In the past installments, power was emphasized over your strategies, so you had to basically grind to beat some of the more challenging levels. On the complete opposite side of the spectrum, if you're skilled enough with planning, you will never have to grind in Fates. I'm not saying I'm necessarily skilled in Fates, but I don't remember having to grind for experience to complete any difficult level. There were multiple times I had to restart because I lost a unit, but I never had to exit out and grind my units up to manage to fight some of the other soldiers. That's not to say the game itself is not hard, because Fates is one of the most challenging strategy games I've played in a good while. Particularly in Conquest, I found myself being bombarded by enemy after enemy if I made one tiny mistake in leaving one unit open. Likewise, if I wasn't prepared for a level, I would get destroyed by the enemies. In Chapter 10, you're tasked with defending a position for 11 turns as enemy forces keep relentlessly attacking you and trying to get past you. So you have to use some cannons to dwindle down the enemy's health. However, these cannons don't kill enemies, they only leave them at 1 health. So you need to have your forces guarding every area an enemy could penetrate, because if one enemy crosses over that line of defense, it's game over. That's one aspect I'm not too fond of in Fates. There were numerous moments where some enemy attacks and missions just felt unfair and poorly designed. Sometimes there are certain paths in this game you have to take if you truly want to win without taking any casualties. But these instances are few and far between, so they don't ruin the experience altogether. Like I said before, combat is entertaining enough for these flaws not to affect the combat a great deal. Another great feature in Fates is the base construction, where you essentially build your own fortress for other players to invade or for you to defend from other players. For some strange reason, I got really attached to the base I was creating, which is odd since I'm not too big on city simulators. Building and running your own town isn't too complex either, so it's kind of fun to customize everything. And it's not like the structures you build are unimportant, because each one helps you in your base invading endeavors, providing weapons and equipment, and boosting affinity towards characters with your private quarters. Oh, and that's yet again another huge part of Fates, support between characters. As you play more and pair up characters together, they gain affinity with one another. If you want a certain couple to marry, you can keep pairing them up, and eventually they'll boost up to an S rank where they'll have a kid and be extremely beneficial to one another on the battlefield. In this particular Fire Emblem game, you can actually form same-sex relationships, which is great, but there's a little catch. You can only be a girl and be best friends with a girl in Birthright, and be a boy and be best friends with another boy in Conquest. Why this split was implemented into Fates, I will never understand. And yeah, that just about covers it for Fire Emblem Fates Birthright, Conquest, and Revelations. Overall, Fates is an amazing game. Now, Fates is not perfect, and the fact that the experience is split into 3 games is quite dumb. But I still really enjoyed my playtime with every title here. Out of them all, I'd have to say Revelations is my favorite because of the unique story, but Conquest is a close second. The illusion of choice in the story does bother me quite a bit, but the plot is pretty interesting and engaging. Characters are fleshed out and the writing is fantastic. Plus, the visuals and soundtrack are the best in the Fire Emblem series, in my opinion. By the same token, the gameplay is just as enjoyable as you'd expect from Fire Emblem, and never became too repetitive or tedious, even though I played through all 3 games in about a week or so. I'd recommend any game from Fire Emblem Fates to anyone, as I believe anyone can get hooked into this gameplay style like I did when I first played Awakening. Any of these games are worth the complete price of $40, and if you manage to find the special edition, I'd also recommend you pick that up. There is a lot of content in Fates, even with it being divided into 3 games. You could spend over 100 hours in just one title if you really wanted to and probably not get bored. Plus, there are DLC and amiibo battles to go through if you ever need to spice up the gameplay. In other words, don't wait for a price dropper sale. Go buy it when you can, as soon as you can. But as always, if you disagree or agree with me, let me know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching and take care. Have a wonderful day and goodbye.